want to paint the picture of what's possible, it's really important to start where you are and to be honest about where you are and to bring more soul, more honesty, more courage to where you are. That's always how we get stronger. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited for this Facebook Live. This has been a long time it's been a long process of writing this book, but I'm so excited to finally be at the point at which it is now available for all of you. And I'm just excited to be with those of you that are here tonight to just talk about it and to have a little mini celebration before the bigger celebration in September. So welcome. I'm glad you're here. Several of you have written in questions, and I'd just be happy to take them and just talk about a little bit about the book and the process. And Christy, certainly jump in whenever you want to ask clarifying questions or you have questions that you think would be helpful to people. You know, one of the top most asked questions is, will the book be available in audio format? And yes, it's going to be. I haven't started recording it, but I start in just a few days. I'm working with somebody here who helps authors record their books. And so I'm really hopeful that I will sound alive and dynamic as I read my book, but that's not my favorite thing, but she will be coaching me. And if I flatten or whatever, she'll say, hey, redo that sentence. Hopefully it'll be available by the book release date. I know that you will be able to at least pre-order the audio if it's not quite ready to go, but it will be ready to go to the editor and all of that in just like in about a week. So they should be able to get it uploaded in time for the release of the book, but it's coming even if it's not quite ready. Maybe just start with this question, which is, what inspired you to start teaching about the fact that desire, divinity, and intimacy should be combined? So I think this is a good question. And, you know, when Faith Matters, I didn't really know anything. I knew nothing about Faith Matters when they reached out to me about 4 years ago about the idea of writing a short book about sexuality and spirituality. And I had been approached many times, well, I don't know, many, but several times about writing a book. And I just always thought, at least not now, I'm not sure if I'll ever do it. But when Faith Matters reached out, I really liked what Faith Matters was doing, you know, really applying our theology to really affect the everyday lives of members of the church and people that have grown up in our LDS tradition to live richer, better lives using the best in our theology. And so when I understood what Faith Matters is about, I really felt the desire to just be a part of what they're doing. And the topic of sexuality and spirituality, really, I did not actually know what the relationship of the two were, but I always could feel that there was a connection, and it was one that I wanted to sort out. And so in many ways, what I feel like writing the book has done is that so many of the courses that I've been teaching and the principles I've been teaching, like they all had coherency to them, and they all felt resonant for me about my lived experience about working with clients and working with couples and so on. But I hadn't really sorted out the kind of foundational idea of what's happening, because I could feel a spirituality in people's development and as they grew in their ability to love and be loved and so on, but I didn't know how to fully understand it. And that's partly why I said yes to the project. And it didn't turn out to be a quick book. I mean, it went from what I thought might be a year project to 4 years. You know, my mom was sick in there. And so there were some things that kind of waylaid the process a little bit, but it was also just valuable for me to be grappling with these ideas, thinking about them, talking about them in podcasts, because for me, I'm very much I sort of work out my ideas a lot through talking. And so that was just really valuable for me to be asking that question, thinking about that question, better understanding how we think about spirituality, how we think about sexuality, and how those two either feel very unrelated depending on where we are in our lives, or highly related depending on where we are in our lives and our relationships. So I feel like writing the book has been even if no one were to buy the book, I'm grateful that I did it because I feel like I really worked out my own mind at a different level and in a way that's been really rewarding for me and I think has affected my thinking and my teaching. And, it's just helped me have more clarity about what we're about here and what we're doing as beings on this earth, grappling with what it is to love one another, grappling with what it is to be in these important relationships, and most important, perhaps, the relationship of marriage. So let me just go back to the question because I feel like maybe I know. So what inspired me? Yeah. Yeah, the invitation and the longing, I guess, the desire, which is really a piece, I kind of understood what Eros was beforehand. I think, I spoke about it in the men's course, and I think I'd referenced the idea of Eros, but this helped me get an understanding at a much better level to really understand Eros as human longing, the desire to reach beyond ourselves, how connected that longing is to our spirituality, to transcendence, to moving outside of our insular and safe world, and how much it's implicitly risky. It's certainly risky to our sense of control. It's risky to predictability. It's risky to that. But it's really what expands our hearts and souls and makes us feel alive and helps us live in a way that's joyful. And so that's really because it kept pointing me to the idea of how we create deeper joy in our lives, how we experience a kind of meaning and anchor in the face of a deeply imperfect world, a fallen world. And that's how the title of the book emerged, is that it was clearly a book about how our theology can point us to joy. So what idea in the book do you think will challenge LDS members the most? And that's a very good question. I certainly think there's several in there that could, but perhaps it would be my chapter 9, which is, might be good if people don't jump to chapter 9, but they work their way to it. Because I'm laying out the sort of foundational ideas that, are building up to chapter 9. There's 10 chapters. And chapter 9 is entitled Towards an Embodied Sensual Faith, and really explicitly valuing the body as an instrument of perception, as core to our spiritual knowing, as fundamental to joyfulness in life. And so it's probably my favorite chapter, the one that maybe was hardest for me to write, that I had to grapple with maybe the longest. And so so I think that might be the chapter that would challenge people, because I think we tend to think of sensuality and spirituality as antithetical, or that the body is in fact the way we get tempted away from goodness, from virtue, from self-control. And of course, it is true that we must build our capacity for breaks, to be able to say no to things. If pleasure is more important than doing what is good, okay, then of course, pleasure can interfere with living joyful lives. But on the other hand, to be joyful, we must be able to integrate pleasure. We must be able to live and choose and celebrate and dance and enjoy food, enjoy sensuality, enjoy sexuality, that these are so important to living our lives in a joyful and meaningful way. So I would say that could be the chapter that people might find challenging. But I think on the other hand, I think that while my ideas often do challenge people, I suppose so often people can feel the truth in it. It's something they've been trying to get worked out, and it gives language for what their experience is. It helps them put some framing into what they're already living and grappling with. So I'm sure the book will get 5 and 1-star reviews, people that love it and people that, don't like it. But I do hope that it will at least push people to really think about our faith, think about what our faith can offer to us, because it's a pretty extraordinary theology and there's so much richness there. And we tend to often go towards the more Law of Moses interpretations, the more limited way of thinking about our faith. And there's so much there for us if we can open our eyes to it. So this question leads easily into this. Is this book primarily written for the LDS culture and how we teach sexuality as a whole? And will anyone from a religious purity culture background benefit from reading it? And after reading it, will it help clarify how to help ourselves and our kids have a better understanding of spirituality through sexuality? Okay, let me see. I guess I would say yes to all those, but let me maybe explain it a little bit. So, as any of you that follow me know, I've really made Latter-day Saints my primary focus. It's my group, it's my people, it's the people that I know best. And so, yes, I wrote this book. I mean, if I was going to do it just based on the economics, probably I should have written to a broader audience. But I really felt like that our theology has some real richness to offer us if we can see it, that we can become stronger and more joyful as people. And so I really wrote it unapologetically for an LDS audience. But because I'm talking about the principles of living our lives well, living our lives joyfully, how to grow in our ability to love and to know and to be loved and known, right? That these are fundamental human questions that we're all reaching towards, trying to sort out. And I think especially anyone who, I reference Christian thinking a lot. And so I think that anyone who's coming from a religious or Christian background will benefit from it. I mean, it might just mean sometimes knowing, like, even that we might have joy is a Book of Mormon reference, so there are certainly those references in the book, but there's plenty of biblical references and things that I think as striving to live our lives in a moral and grounded and faithful way, it will be relatable. I have people that follow me in Israel. I have Muslims that follow my work. So, anyone who's really grappling with the question of how to be true to who I am, even within my ethnic group, within my cultural group, how do I grapple with what is true there and what I don't resonate with? How do I be true to my soul while being true to the people that I belong to? And I think that's a very human question, and one that, because I'm often trying to speak to that question for Latter-day Saints, I think a lot of different people from different cultural experiences can relate to those questions. And then finally, yes, the very last chapter, chapter 10, chapter 9 is like the climax of the book. Okay. And then chapter 10 is like when you have the kids outside the door, you still have to deal with the kids. Okay. So chapter 10 is how to talk to our children, or, if we have nieces and nephews, even if don't have our own children, like, how do we think about and how do we talk to our children and ourselves, for that matter, about sexuality? And so I lay it out in 10 kind of foundational principles to teach about our relationship to embodiment and pleasure and sensuality and self-control and making mistakes and all these things, and help parents know and teachers know how to talk about these things. Okay.
I'm so excited that you have a chapter about that, because it was interesting in the Sex Worth Wanting webinar we were just at. So many of the questions were pulling for that. How do we teach our kids? Now that we're learning this, how do we teach our kids that? So
yeah, exactly.
It's very valuable.
Yeah, 100%. It's because once you start waking up to another possibility, then you're like, oh no, like I did this all wrong, or oh my gosh, I hope that I haven't hurt my kids, or, how do I talk to them about these very ideas? So yes, of course, we have the How to Talk to Your Kids About Sex course, which is, of course, the much longer version of chapter 10. But chapter 10 certainly is there to point you to these kind of foundational ideas. This person says, in your book, Sneak Peek, you talk about how sexual intimacy can reveal the truth of a relationship and how facing that truth with integrity can lead to more joy and connection. In my marriage, I sometimes feel undesired or disconnected. I'm trying to stay grounded and not become resentful, but it's hard. How can someone hold on to hope and keep showing up with honesty and integrity when their longing for connection feels one-sided? So this is a great question, because it isn't to say that facing the truth of who you are and who your relationship is, it can lead to more joy and connection, but it doesn't necessarily. Okay, this is the hard thing about faith. This is the hard thing about Eros. This is the hard thing about leaning into our lives and taking the risk to desire more, to open our hearts up and to choose a partner or choose to reveal more of who we are. It's risky because we risk having our hearts broken. We risk being disappointed. We risk even loving well and then having to face losing a spouse, right? To live is to risk, and to address honestly and truthfully who we are and where our marriage is the necessary beginning point of a different marriage, but also the possibility of recognizing a marriage is not going to grow. And that's why most of us would rather hold back and resent, not face what's there, because it's really hard to confront. In order for something to grow, you must face the possibility of it dying. It's not easy. That's also where I see most likely that couples change. It's when they really are facing, this may never be what I want. For example, I've worked with couples where one person's the higher desire person for more connection, or at least they believe they are. You know, they certainly are the ones that are complaining about it, or are the ones bringing up the issues. And yet they're often in a kind of stable pattern where one pursues and the other resists. A couple can keep living out iterations of that same dynamic over and over and over again. Sometimes, though, when we really face it, you want something different. You don't want what I want. That's hard. It's painful, but it's often there that something new and stronger grows. You know, Eros doesn't necessarily lead to what you want. It often will break your heart. It often leads to disappointment. But wherever it leads you, because it's listening to our souls, it's living with deeper honesty, it leads us somewhere stronger. It helps us clarify more deeply who we are. It allows us to be known at a deeper level. It puts us in touch with suffering, but what's real. And because we're so afraid of suffering, afraid of what we can't control, we often live our lives in a muted way. And I know this isn't a really easy answer, because it's like, well, then what do I do? How do I say the sentence differently? It's not really about that, as you've probably heard me say, any of you who follow me, that it's not about saying the thing that will get your spouse to want what you want. It's about confronting the finiteness of your life, your situation, and making the choices that your soul can back up. That's where we find our lives. That's where we find our strength, even though it's no guarantee to avoid suffering. But it does increase our capacity for joy. It does increase the likelihood of deeper joy within our lives. Okay, Christy, before I take more, are there any questions that are coming in or anything that...
Yes, someone was asking if the book would be appropriate for someone who's divorced and for single people as well. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely think so. You know, we just taught the Sex Worth Wanting course, which is a new course that's going to be available in a few weeks. We taught it a couple times, but there was a person there that was single, and she had gone through a divorce, but she was like, I really want to better understand how to think about sexuality, how to think about sexual intimacy, how to relate to this part of being human. So I wrote it, you know, for couples. I wrote it for people in long-term marriages, because when you first fall in love and attraction is high, you know, it's like, well, why would I even need, you know, this is so easy. I have too many feelings of attraction, right? Whatever. But once we're in a long-term relationship and our disappointments become present and we don't feel free to be ourselves in the marriage in the way we did when we were first falling in love and so on, that's where we start to confront the disillusionment and the challenge of how do I keep desiring the person I already have? Or how do I keep feeling excited about somebody that I feel pretty angry at a lot of the time? You know, that's when we're up in this, against this crunch, this crucible of of how do I be true to me and build a marriage with you who's so maddeningly different than I am? And so learning this larger picture of what our relationships ask of us, what our sexuality asks of us, it's also a deeply, I mean, it's a theological book. I wouldn't say it feels like when you're reading it, you're just reading theology, but I'm offering a way of thinking about the human project, about what we're about what it is to grow and what it is to be joyful. So, I mean, if I were single, I would 100% want to read this book because I would feel like it would give me an understanding of what it means to partner, what would be a wise way of thinking about it. If I were to partner down the road, I would want that perspective 100%.
There's another question. Has
Sure.
the process of writing the book changed the way you approach therapy or coaching? If so, how?
I don't know that it really has changed my approach. I write about my approach in the book, which is, very much about the way that we grow. It's interesting because I was always kind of witnessing the way that people really change, which is helping them to take in more truth. And in the process of taking in more truth and tolerating the puncture to their view of themselves, to their view of their marriage, that with their agency, people could choose their way into a stronger soul, choose their way into a stronger marriage. Of course, it takes two people to make those kinds of choices, two people to want something better. And so again, even if you do your part, you get the beam out of your eye, it doesn't guarantee that you get a better marriage. But, I write about the stages of development. I read a lot of Robert Kegan's work. And in reading that, it was like, oh, here's language for what I experience with people. This is how I see people repenting, literally changing their mind. So I think it has lent confidence to me of that process. I think I was kind of witnessing, it was really more through boots on the ground, getting more confidence in that process of seeing people evolve and grow and get happier. But I think it gave me a little more theoretical understanding of what's happening and maybe a little more confidence in that process. Yeah.
Someone asked if you could define sexual integration and how your book brings that topic alive.
So sexual integration is the foundational concept that I start with, is that that's really what our goal is. It's not sexual repression, which we often, because of our high standards around sexual behavior and, many religious people's fear of sexuality in general, that it can be a way to, lose our spiritual grounding and so on, that we often manage that fear through the false ideal of sexual repression, that, your only goal is to get your child to the altar a virgin and then you've succeeded. Never mind that often means that they have so much shame and anxiety about sexuality. They have no self-awareness around their sexuality that they're not capable of creating an intimate marriage. And so, I challenge the idea that that's our goal. I challenge the idea that this is our only goal, and that we have the harder goal in some respects. First of all, repression doesn't work. It turns into preoccupation, either the preoccupation of indulgence or the preoccupation of continuing to repress, or the preoccupation that emerges when the marriage is suffering because it lacks spiritual and sexual depth. And so I argue that not only does it not work, but it actually really interferes with what our spiritual project really is, because it's not that the body's a problem and it's not that pleasure's a problem. Women wouldn't have a clitoris if pleasure were the problem. Okay. The challenge is, how do I relate to pleasure? How do I relate to embodiment in a way that is deeply moral, that creates goodness in my life? How do I relate to my capacity for pleasure in a way that accrues to my well-being and the strength of my relationships? I teach that it's learning to accept ourselves as sexual and sensual beings and making choices that are in line with our morality, with what we believe is true and good. And that is a process of learning to accept our humanity, to accept our embodied state, which is its own challenge, right? And then to learn to make choices that are in line with our honest beliefs and what is actually loving. And all of that is so valuable because the more we learn to do it, the more capable we are of intimate love, the more capable we are of the peace and solace and beauty that is there for us. But it is a process of learning to be embodied. And so my goal is to help us to challenge the false traditions that many of us have inherited that have interfered with being able to do that and to create that. It's really important to sexual intimacy because if you're not at peace with yourself as a sexual being, if you can't accept your own capacity for pleasure, how are you going to really share your sexuality, your sexual self with another person, right? You might be looking to them for validation. You might be looking to them to make it okay through their desire, but you're going to struggle to really let them in on who you are, right? Emotionally and sexually, if you haven't forged some peace with yourself. And peace comes not just through acceptance, that is part of it, and accepting our humanity, but also by making choices we can respect, by forgiving ourselves for being imperfect in this process, but also making choices in a way that we don't feel we have anything to hide. That allows us to be unapologetic about our sexual selves, about our sensual reality. I reference a little bit the Italians and Epicureanism and the Epicurean culture in Italy, which is very much one based on pleasure that accrues to our happiness. So it's not about indulgence. It's not about big gulps and huge portions. Maybe sometimes that is there, but what it really is like everything is an art form, even the food you eat. And there's just sensual beauty everywhere because in Epicureanism, it's the beauty and the sensual pleasure is a part of our spiritual well-being. And not indulgence that works against our spirituality and joy, but not repression either, because that also works against our spirituality and joy. And so the harder project is, how do I relate to pleasure in this way that makes my life richer, like to be able to receive the gift of the body. We talk about it like it's just like this one and done. I got my body, got that part done, rather than receiving the gift of it, the pleasure that comes with it, the capacity for joy that comes with our embodiment. That's more of a process of trust and faith in a God that loves us, that wants us to be joyful. We say the idea, it's easy to say it, it's harder to believe it, to really believe it with our hearts. This person just asked, does Jennifer's book address sexual betrayal, and how, for those who stay, does the couple repair the damage done to the relationship and their sexual relationship? I don't take up betrayal. I do take up just the process of change and challenge within marriage. So through several stories of how couples evolve, or what happens when couples refuse to self-confront or refuse to grow. But no, I don't take up specifically infidelity or betrayal, although I do have a mini course on this topic, but I do think that's a topic that I'm hoping to spend more time and resources on to help people through the challenges of betrayal, because it's definitely hard stuff and hard to rebuild that common, how to say it, like a shared understanding of what happened, what got the couple into their crisis, and what has changed for them to build a new foundation on which to create something different, what to do when those regressions happen, when one kind of is back in their fear and their panic. None of these things are easy, of course, but just having more clarity about what it is to recover from infidelity, who are the couples that succeed at it, who are the ones that don't. I do hope I can do more with that topic in the next year or two. Okay. For those who are new to or new again to the dating and courting process, how can faithful LDS members best learn of a potential partner's interest and level of desire for a fulfilling, joy-filled sex life? I don't really know the answer to this. And one of the reasons is that the context of pre-marriage and marriage are very different contexts. I would even argue the context of pre-marriage and living together and marriage are three different contexts. And so um, it's can be hard to know, how do the meanings shift, what changes. Is this a person that is interested in an intimate marriage, in a sexual relationship? And is this a person that is capable of growing and self-confronting and doing their part? I really would say, if I were talking to my kids about this, I would say those two things matter. That this is a partner that wants a good sexual relationship. They understand that for themselves as a valuable part of marriage. And I would imagine part of that's understood through the conversations you might have about it, but also what it's like to have even a limited physical relationship with them. Is there ease there? Is there comfort there? Is there a freedom to be yourself in the relationship? This is very, very, very important. I talk about this a lot in Sex Worth Wanting, is that we want to feel free in our sexual relationships, and we want to feel ourselves. We want to know that we can be ourselves, not just in the marriage, but all the way into the sexual relationship, that we don't have to pretend anything, prove anything, manage anything. And so I would say that this sense of, is there an ease in the physical relationship, even if it's limited? Is there an open-heartedness? Is there an open-heartedness in the emotional relationship? Does your potential spouse value this part? And if they do, why do they value it? What is it that they value about it? Is your potential spouse someone who would confront himself or herself, that would acknowledge wrongdoing and do something different? Are you someone who will do that, right? It takes two people to do that if you want a marriage that will grow. Can you work out those differences pretty comfortably before marriage? Is it a big challenge to work out a disagreement, or is there two people that are pretty comfortable coming forward and acknowledging where they might have done something better? That's just really important. Can you be yourself there? Does it feel free? Does it feel forced? So I would say these are the biggest things, because once you get married, you're going to come up against disillusionments and challenges and boredom and moments of desire differences that could be related to stresses at work or having children. And so you're going to need all those muscles to be able to work out who you are as a couple. But, very importantly, do you feel like you can be yourself with each other? Because you're really going to need that as you sort out how you navigate your way through. Okay.
I have a
Go
few
ahead.
questions that came in.
Sure.
Would you
Yeah.
recommend a wife and husband read the book together and discuss what do you feel are the benefits or perhaps challenges in absorbing it together?
Yeah, I think that I certainly wouldn't try to force it into, let's read this together. I think so. First of all, the book is written in a way that there's questions at the end of each chapter. And we are currently right now trying to decide if we really just literally put them at the end of the chapter to answer right away, or we put them in appendix so that you can just write all your questions and have them in one section. We're trying to figure that out. That's getting sorted out in the next day or two. But you can, it's going to function somewhat like a workbook. And so I think it would be quite ideal to have your own copy, to be able to write everything you think the first time through, to just go through kind of on your own terms, sort out how you are relating to these ideas. What do you see about yourself in it? And then coming back to it and maybe going through a chapter at a time and beginning to have more honest conversations, beginning to have, more self-revealing. This is how I related to this idea, or I did learn this idea, and I think it had this effect on me, and I see this shaping my choices even now. Or I think this is a way that I hide in our marriage. This is a way that I'm not very forthcoming with you. And yeah, so I think those conversations are very, very important. But if I were to say, what I would probably recommend is that people go through it first once on their own and then come back through it, just to find your footing a little bit.
Is there anything that you ultimately decided not to include after wrestling with this project? Why did you make these decisions?
Let's see. Well, there were certainly things that the publisher thought would be good to include, like doing more around pornography specifically. I'm trying to remember some of the other things. There was just so many things that I could talk about, infidelity, I did do an appendix on pornography. So that is, there's several stories that are dealing with a couple with pornography challenges. And so I reference it, but I'm not giving my full mind in these chapters because I'm pointing to a larger principle or another idea. And so we decided after I'd written the book that it might be helpful for people to just have something to, it's pretty short. I'm not writing every last thought I have about the topic, but just giving people a way to think about pornography, or at least to understand how I tend to think about it and how I think about compulsivity in porn and so on. So I did end up kind of including that. I'm trying to think if there's things that, I guess I wished that I could have spent more time on. I have one story where the man is the lower desire person and the wife is the higher desire person. But, there's just a lot of different relationship dynamics that just, I went for the most common ones, but there's just other narratives and stories. You have to listen to Room for Two to get to all those different people. but yeah, I just sometimes wished I could just get more stories in there, but the book did have to end at a certain point. I ended up sort of last minute, not really last minute, but like it was going to be a 9-chapter book. And then I just scooched, I wrote a chapter between what was 7 and 8. And so now the new chapter 8 is a new chapter. And I think it was a valuable addition to just give a little more concrete input around how to think about sexuality and joy and pleasure, and just giving a little bit more. I mean, the one thing I don't take up at all are things like, fantasy. These are a lot of things I talk about in the courses and help people with, but I'm really just laying out more some of a foundational perspective on which to understand these things, but not hammering down on all the details in that way.
Do you really see people change and become happier in their marriages? It seems too good to be true, given all the messiness in past ways of being taught and years of living a certain way.
I definitely see people get happier. I definitely watch it. It's the coolest thing about my job. Yeah, 100% I see it. I think it's also true that not every marriage will grow, or that not every marriage is going to become joyful. I think, though, that as human beings, we can take any situation we're in and utilize it to become stronger people, and to develop our morality, and to develop an internal, honest anchor into ourselves and into divinity. And so yeah, I think we have the capacity to be more capable of joy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that our marriage will get better, because it takes two people and you can't determine for your spouse what they'll choose. You making good choices certainly takes away your spouse's excuses. You taking up your half, getting the beam out of your eye, certainly makes it more likely that your spouse will. But of course, everybody has agency. And that's in some ways why the issue of being desired is so precious, because it's something you cannot control. You can control your desirability. You can control your investment in the marriage, how deeply you desire and choose your spouse. But it is ultimately a grace. It's a gift. And so, and I think so much of our ability to be joyful, it's really an act of faith. And what I mean by that is that very often those of us struggling in our marriages came out of families and situations in which we learned that it was bad judgment to be very open or giving or self-confronting, that to let people in on who you are could work against your well-being. And so a lot of times we are taking how we were treated and instinctively reenacting those realities into our lives, and then limiting how peaceful those relationships are, right? We're living what we know because it's familiar to us. It feels safer than taking the risk of loving at a different level, of bringing more of our whole hearts there, of loving the way we wanted to be loved. And so because we so understandably recreate what we know rather than reaching into the dark for something better, many of us don't change. Many of us don't change our relationships. But even though I would say it's quite normal to just recapitulate what you know, certainly people make changes. People make courageous changes. It's the best part of what I do because it's so inspiring to see moral courage. It's so remarkable to see people stand up and do what they really know is right. And it's rare. I mean, I would never take it for granted because most of us spend most of our time justifying what we already do, even if we call ourselves deeply religious and faithful people. But your faith is measured by how you act, by how willing you are to do the right thing, even when it is a risk, even when there's no guarantee that it will be met with another good action. And so that's really what it means to believe in God and goodness.
That same person said, what advice do you have to people beginning the journey of change that seems steep? I wondered if, often at retreats, you talk about the first day as demo day. Is the book kind of a similar experience where you break us down before you?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So what Chrissy's referencing is that I often just warn people, today may be rough because like the Art of Desire event, I'm always like, text your husbands if you're going home tonight and let them know that you will not want sex tonight. Okay. Get expectations clear because oftentimes we're in a paradigm that feels like how things are, but it's a meaning paradigm that's limiting what's possible. And so I usually start by helping people see the paradigm that they're operating in and how it's self-limiting. And so it's like literally, if you want a better kitchen, you got to take down the old kitchen, but that can be very disorienting. The microwave is covered in dust and you have to go into the bathroom to get a sink, and it's miserable. And so the first half of the book, and I let readers know, I have the introduction, which kind of sets up the problem. The first chapter is a little bit the vision of where the book is going and what we're capable of. But then chapters 2, 3, and 4 are demolition. Okay. They're like, what are the false traditions that we've learned that have really limited what we're capable of as a people and as in our marriages? And so then I help people start rebuilding a framing to think about it, chapters 5 through 10. It can be disorienting at first. Like, I've just gotten everything wrong. We'll never get anywhere. We're a mess. Okay. And what I think is really important is to think about, what do I know? Rather than just being overwhelmed at all the things that I could do, that I could work on, what is the one thing that I know I really need to deal with? Something about my own participation in my suffering, whether that's in how I relate to myself, how I relate to my marriage, how I relate to my self-development, how I relate to being challenged. Okay. There's going to be something that if you're honest with yourself, which I highly recommend as you read this book, because we can't change what we can't see. And if we're afraid to be honest with ourselves, we'll limit what we can see. But if you're courageously being honest with yourself, you're going to see that there are things that your soul is telling you, right? That in your relationship with God, that you will feel, I need to deal with this. I'm scared to deal with it. It's hard to be honest about it. It's hard to go and talk to my spouse about this if you're married. And yet it's like that prompting, I need to go deal with this thing. And if we do it, right, if we have enough faith to act better, we'll be rewarded with more faith in that process, more faith in ourselves, more faith in our ability to make things better in our lives. And then we can do it again, and we'll be rewarded with a deeper self-respect, a little more freedom in our marriage, and more faith. And it's line upon line that we become stronger, that we become better. And so, yes, it can be totally overwhelming. And one of my fears about the book was just because I'm painting some of the ideals of what we're capable of. And I stand by those ideals. We are capable of it. But if you feel like we aren't that, that's an ideal I can't relate to. We're in a sexless marriage and she's talking about sex that's transcendent. How would we ever get there? So while I I want to paint the picture of what's possible, it's really important to start where you are and to be honest about where you are, and to bring more soul, more honesty, more courage to where you are. That's always how we get stronger. You know, spiritual development is not for the faint of heart. We're in the lone and dreary world trying to have enough faith to work our way through. And so it's not easy, right? But it can really help to understand the process that we're involved in and why it matters, and that it's really about a God that wants us to have joy, that our courage yields more capacity for joyfulness and for peace in our own hearts. And so it's well worth our trouble to push ourselves to be truer to the best in who we are. I'm just going to read this one question that's in front of me. My question to Jennifer is if she has ever read Moroni 7, Mormon's question and answer about good things, to see how it overlaps with her work in building, sustaining good in people. And I will definitely go and reread Moroni 7. That's really cool, actually. While sexuality is not overtly discussed there, faith and what supports it and can make it a sustaining pathway to the good life certainly is discussed. This talk that Moroni includes last minute might be a through theme motivation for all of Mormon's writing. Yeah. Mormon asks, how can you lay hold of every good thing? And then describes a tiered structure of which faith is a component. Undergirding faith is his description is a cornerstone of meekness, upon which is laid stones of lowliness of heart and hope in things that are true. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's really cool. Faith, like a beam, rests on that smaller structure, and in his description is also supported by a pillar of charity. If that pillar is removed, the whole structure of good things built upon faith falls apart. What are the physical manifestations of those ideals? Meekness, lowliness of heart, hope, charity, faith. Yeah. The physical manifestations of those ideals, nakedness, arousal, giving and receiving love, are components of sexuality. That is where a link is found, in my opinion. Yeah. When those ideals are aligned with non-counterfeit meanings, the physical manifestations of them do build good things. Thank you to Jennifer for pointing people to be meek, lowly in heart, and hope in things that are true. Thank you to her for teaching couples to be charitable with each other. Well, that's beautiful. That's lovely. And I mean, I would say that something that's been very meaningful for me just in writing the book has been my deepening faith in the process that we're involved in of learning to love, of waking up to the beauty of being alive, to the beauty of being able to have this experience in which we can grow and learn and suffer and also create deeper goodness and deeper joy. It's remarkable. And I think I just can feel the deep structure, that's the deep truths that are here that we are sorting our way to sort of feel and know through the way we live. The great privilege of watching people go through that process, of knowing it in my own life, of being invited over and over again, even through working with other people, for me to repent, for me to be a better person, to face my lesser self, my egocentrism and so on, and to be better. That's just a tremendous gift. And I think that understanding that our faith offers us of what we're doing can be a tremendous roadmap and balm for us in the face of what's not easy to do. I've loved feeling that more as I've written and sorted through these ideas. Any other questions, Christy, that have come in before we stop?
There were about 100 other questions that came in, but that was a really beautiful place to end. And I just wondered if we could talk for a minute about all the opportunities coming up for people to come get their book signed. You're doing a fundraiser for Faith Matters on September 12th. This is going to be a very small event. There's only 20 people coming.
And all the proceeds go to Faith Matters. And so we're having this at the Compass in Provo, and you get the earliest signed copies of the book we're showing a premiere of a 16-minute documentary just about the work that I do that we created over the last year. And then I'll be teaching as well. So it'll be very fun opportunity.
If you're not coming to that event, then we're going to have a special launch celebration on September 25th at the Restore conference.
Yeah, so Restore is Faith Matters annual conference or annual event, and they have just amazing speakers, amazing music, poetry, art. It's just the coolest. I mean, and many of the presenters are Latter-day Saints, but there's also, we're having Arthur Brooks coming. He's the happiness researcher, Sharon McMahon, who's a teacher on government and ethics and so on. So we have just great speakers. I will be one of the speakers. I'll be teaching on Saturday right before lunch to the main hall. And then after, we'll have a breakout session where you can come. I'll teach a little more, ask questions, sign books.
We would love to see you there. We're going to have a book booth up. Jennifer will be there lots of the time signing books. And so you'll be able to get your book signed if you come on September 25th or on the 27th when she's presenting. You will want to be at the whole conference, but you can buy a one-day ticket, and that will get you in on the Thursday night special documentary premiere as well.
Right. So if you get a one-day ticket to come on the 27th, that will get you in on the 25th.
Yes.
And so I don't think I explained that. On the 25th, during the arts night, there's all these artists and art you can buy, and they have musical events and things like that. I will also be talking that night, signing the book. So I'll be there on the evening of the 25th, and then I present on the 27th. But of course, I'll be there throughout the whole event and at the booth a lot of the times.
Right.
We quickly tell people about other things, or should we just
let people We've got them here. They want to hear about it. Of course we should.
Okay. So let's see. We have an Art of Desire event that is all new. I mean, I wouldn't say it's all new, but I'm adding more elements into the curriculum on self-development and also sexual desire and kind of how it what is the sort of structure of desire and more about the ecology of desire. So that's the Art of Desire event. It's in Hillsboro, Oregon. It's September 8th through the 11th, Monday through Thursday. These are just the coolest events. You get to know really amazing women, amazing food. The setting there is beautiful. This is kind of Tuscany in Hillsboro, Oregon. So it's really gorgeous.
The Art of Loving is November 3rd through 5th, and the Sex Worth Wanting Couples Retreat is November 6th through 8th. They're both in St. George, and there's lodging on site still available for both of those events. And the other thing I'll say, you have a training coming up for licensed therapists and students, and it keeps selling out, but we have a virtual option. If you would like to attend virtually, there are tickets for that as well. So I'm just going to link to the overall event page. We have so much.
Yeah, that's exactly. Now that the book's done, I'm like, I've got time. Things to do.
Lots of good things in store. The Sex Worth Wanting course, I'll just put in my plug for it. It is phenomenal. I'm so excited for the online course to be available because it's just the cream of the crop. It's everything. So get excited for that, or come experience it in person in November.
Yeah. Okay, and someone's asked a very important question, Christy. Can we count on you rocking cool shoes as you often do at the Restore conference? I'm working on it, okay? I need some new cool shoes, and I haven't found them, but I hope to find them.
I trust in you. You'll be able to.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, thanks so much, everybody. It was a pleasure. You all are wonderful, and I hope to see a lot of you in September. It'll be wonderful. Okay, thanks, everybody.